and welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell, that's Bud Elliott, that's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Fired up to get you set for an absolutely massive week ahead in the Big Ten. Coming up in the course of the next hour, we're going to take you inside the matchup of Ohio State traveling to go take on Oregon with this massive battle, what it means for the big national title, college football playoff race, what it means for the Big Ten title race, but also like how do these teams stack up against each other as they both expect to remain in both of those races as we move on. Also, USC. Can the Trojans get up off the mat as they welcome in a Penn State team that has been on the rise? Big game breakdown for that as well. So much to get into, but gentlemen, let's get rolling with some burning questions, because coming out of the weekend, one of the biggest Big Ten results was Washington beating Michigan. And so I'd like to start with the burning question, but I'm going to come to you first. Are you buying in on Washington so far?
Chip, I mean, buying, of course, depends on the price, but I think you really have to appreciate what you saw from Washington against Michigan, because up until that point, Washington had really played a lot of teams that don't have bodies, which will be playing at the next level on the lines of scrimmage. And, offensive line, Michigan's a bit of a disappointment this year, but defensive line is still really good. And they were able to pass protect enough. I think they had like 9 passes of 15-plus yards against Michigan, which if you're a Michigan fan, you kind of want to throw up in your mouth a little bit watching that. But Jed Fish does a nice job scheming it up. And also, so they held up on the long lines of scrimmage, and they also just stopped beating themselves. Like they probably should have won the Rutgers game if they could just stop self-destructing in special teams, in red zone, in short area, and with critical penalties. So they played a much cleaner game against a better opponent in Michigan. So I think you have to buy.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what are you buying. Like, are they Big Ten contenders? I wouldn't put them in that category, but I think you buy on them as the top half for certain of the Big Ten. I think you buy them as being much better than I thought they would be this season. When we talked to Jed Fish, it was all about the reload, right? They're reloading, and they had lost so much talent, and you had to replace a whole coaching staff. You had to bring in new players, which he did, and he built a staff that has really got this team up to speed pretty quickly. And I think the most important thing is, like, almost every game you look at in the schedule, barring probably Penn State and Oregon, I think you give them a chance to win, which is not the way I would have viewed this team before the season. So I think they're a bowling team on the bare minimum. I think they'll get to 6 wins. And I think you're talking 7 and 8 potentially if they have another shocking upset. I do like to see a little bit more. The win against Michigan, remember, they were favored. It was Michigan playing multiple quarterbacks, figuring things out. I think we're really about to find out who Washington is this weekend at Iowa. But yeah, I buy on them as being a team that far exceeded my expectations for them this year.
Yeah, the thing about like a team in the situation that Washington's in, because we've seen it a lot of times across the country with different programs the last few years, is when there's a lot of transfer activity on a roster, you can never really be sure what you're going to get. It could work well. It could blow up in your face. And I think to this point, what's happened at Washington with all the changes on the coaching staff and on the roster from last year's team, you have to be pleased overall with the directions things seem to be going. But like that loss to Rutgers, that could haunt them, because that truly was a game in which they did beat themselves more than Rutgers beat them. And if they had won that game and pulled through, we're talking about a 5-1 team that might actually have a chance to end up getting to Indianapolis and getting to the Big Ten championship. But on the whole, from what I've seen of the Huskies, they're good at home. And when they go on the road, it's been a little iffy. So, like, we'll see them this week going on the road to face Iowa. Will they be able to take that, the performance they had last week at home against a Michigan team that isn't quite as good as I think any of us thought they might be coming into the year? So I don't know how valuable that win truly will be at the end of the season when we look back on things. But going on the road to face an Iowa team that defensively is very solid and very tough, can Washington keep that going this weekend and get another win? If they do, then I think that this is certainly a team we have to start considering as a possible candidate to be that 4th best team in the league.
Yeah, that's a great call, Tom, because I don't think that I had Washington as a bowl team coming into the year. And now all of a sudden that's changed. And you start to look at like what Bud mentioned with some of the miscues, missed field goals, red zone issues, penalties, like all those things were preventing Washington from being able to win winnable games. They have outgained all 6 opponents that they had this year, and yet they find themselves at 4-2. Washington State and Rutgers being the games that you feel like they really let get away. But what happened when Michigan, it looked like they were going to be able to win that game? Washington met the moment. And that's where I found myself being really impressed with the roster that Jed Fish did have to kind of cobble together from all kinds of different pieces. You bring over some players from Arizona, a few more from the portal, a little, some summer additions as well. The fact that he's already got them being able to meet the moment against a program the caliber of Michigan, I think that gives them a good chance, but the schedule the rest of the way is absolutely going to be difficult. All right, burning question number 2. Let's stay with that game. Danny, who is the right quarterback for the Michigan Wolverines? Because we got all the way down to QB3 in the process of this game. So what is the offensive outlook for Sharon Moore's squad?
There was a prominent Michigan backer who said he'd pay $3 million. I mean, the best QB is the one they're going to find at the portal this offseason. But for this year, I'll probably say Jack Tuttle, even though it was not great. He's missed some time due to injury. And this is what I do wonder if this staff, because we've even talked about this a lot leading into the season, is why were they so stagnant? Why didn't they go out and get that big portal quarterback? And maybe it was because they knew what they had in Jack Tuttle. So I'm assuming it is him trusting the coaching staff. Davis Warren was a great story, but as a former walk-on, I think you saw some of his weaknesses exposed with the 6 interceptions. Alex Orji, it is evident to everyone that he is just not a passing quarterback. So by default, I'll go with Tuttle, who is older. He is a veteran. He's been around the game a long time. I'll say he's going to get this, for the foreseeable future. But here's the crazy thing. I wouldn't be surprised if you see another switch like back to Orji or back to Warren. I just have no faith in the pass game right now unless Tuttle can win it over. So right now I'll say it's him by default because I've seen what the other 2 can do, and it's not much.
Yeah, that staff might have known what it had in Tuttle, but unfortunately, I know what they have in Tuttle too, and I don't really think it's the kind of quarterback situation that is going to lead to a turnaround for Michigan to get them competing against the better teams in the conference. You mentioned that prominent booster who's willing to spend $3 million on a quarterback this offseason. Should probably put some of that aside for a wide receiver too, because I think that is one of the bigger problems that this Michigan offense is dealing with. We're focused on the quarterback spot, but whether it's Davis Warren, whether it's Jack Tuttle, whether it's Alex Orji, there's nobody to throw the ball to. Michigan's receivers simply do not get open against, power 4 defenses. These cornerbacks that they're going against are covering them like blankets, and that makes it really difficult for any quarterback to have success. But I think that based on his experience and based on at least having the threat of having a passing offense, Tuttle's probably the best option, but I say the word best in the context of the options are Jack Tuttle, Alex Orji, and Davis Warren.
I think I agree with Tom here, actually. Look, Orji is not a good passer, clearly, and the receivers aren't anything really worth throwing to. And you might be more efficient overall with Tuttle in terms of yards, average, all that kind of stuff. But if you also are turning the ball over more, he had 2 turnovers in this game in a relatively small sample set. Like that makes it that much harder on your defense. And I think defensively, Michigan has taken a major step down in terms of coaching quality.
Yes.
Going from what they had last year to what they had this year. And I don't think that's really all Sharon Moore's fault. He didn't have a lot of time to put this staff together with how Jim Harbaugh kind of handled the am I going to stay, am I going to go process. I don't really want to turn this into like a referendum on Sharon Moore. He probably made a bad pick at defensive coordinator. But the point is the defense is not bailing you out to the extent that it would last year if you had turnovers, especially in your own end. We saw that against Washington. So I'm going to go with like the lower variance guy in Orji and try to win every game 20-17, basically what they did against USC. So give me Alex Orji. Give me run game. Give me like 40 plays, super slow tempo.
Yeah, but I'm with you on that one. I think that when they went to Alex Orji as a new full-time starter, my line that I repeated over and over again was he has a limited ceiling, but he raises the floor. And I think longer possessions, the limited turnovers, the explosive ability that he can create in the run game, all might be things I would go to. Orji beat USC. So we'll see how they end up managing this one going forward. And speaking of quarterbacks, after what was an impressive debut, you got to see a lot of the flash, a lot of the substance. It seems like things have cooled a little bit for Nebraska star quarterback Dylan Raiola. So, Tom, the burning question here is, do you think that Dylan Raiola has another level? Because I know you broke down a lot of his game coming into this week. Now, as we start to play this thing moving forward, what do you think the next step in the evolution for this freshman quarterback is going to be?
I think there's definitely another level to Dylan Raiola's game, and it is a question of how long it will take him to get there. It's easy to forget at times that this genuinely is a true freshman. There has been no redshirt, but he is so talented, and he got off to such a very good start that maybe we put a little bit of too high expectations on him. He looked great against Colorado. He looked really good against Illinois, too, even in Nebraska's defeat. But it was last week against Rutgers where he really was struggling with Rutgers' zone defense. He hadn't seen a whole lot of it this year. There was a lot of short throws. And I think part of it for Dylan is he needs to just learn a little bit more about how to play quarterback in an actual football game and less about how to look cool in 7-on-7 drills and the trying to be Patrick Mahomes stuff. Because what separates Raiola from a lot of college quarterbacks is he has the ability to do all that stuff that Patrick Mahomes does or that Caleb Williams has done. Like his ability to kind of divorce his upper body from his lower half and still get a ton of torque and velocity on the throw is something that is truly special and truly unique amongst most college quarterbacks. But he needs to learn how to just kind of, 3-step drop, step and fire, 5-step drop, step and fire. None of this lackadaisical stepping backwards and just kind of hopping around, waiting for something to come open and just kind of flicking your wrist and throwing. So I do think there needs to be a little bit more coaching and development there. But as far as talent is concerned, this kid's got a boatload of talent, and I think he's going to improve as we go along. So it's going to be up and down. It's never just a straight line forward. There are always little step backs, and I think we saw one this week. But I still expect he's going to be one of the better QBs in the league in the years to come.
I've been pretty impressed with how he's been able to go through his progressions against zone. And when Rutgers had more success against him, I thought they were actually playing more man and some blitzes up the middle to make him make fast decisions. Like we talked about on Cover 3 podcast, how he's kind of casual in the pocket, right? Like when he's sped up, can he make those tight window throws? That was an interesting curveball I thought Rutgers started to throw at him after Nebraska had that early success. If I'm a defensive coordinator watching that, like, ooh, okay, does this kid like pressure in his face? Like, I think he's got the guts to stand in there, but does that affect his accuracy? He had a couple pretty bad misfires there against Rutgers when they did bring pressure up the gut. He's not the best athlete in the world. He's not a total slug, but he's not super elusive. So how does he handle pressure in his face? Can he think really quickly? But I think he has the poise to go through the progressions against some of the zone stuff, which for young quarterbacks, that's oftentimes a real problem.
No doubt. I think we have to take into consideration something you guys both already hit on. He is a true freshman. He started off on fire, but the competition wasn't exactly fantastic, right? I mean, he lights up the world the first 3 games. Colorado was the most impressive, and they dominated that from start to finish. Then all of a sudden, in the last couple games, he's been sacked 4 times against Rutgers. Illinois got him 6 times. So all of a sudden, you're starting to see, okay, maybe Nebraska is maybe the bigger problem. They need to give him better support, better protection up front, even some better weapons. But I'm not worried about Dylan Raiola at all. I don't think any of us are. I think you have to be excited about the baseline of what we've seen early. He has lived up to the expectations of what everybody thought he could be. I don't think anybody thought he was going to be a Heisman Trophy contending quarterback all season long, or he was going to have Nebraska in the Big Ten championship. But the quarterback play overall has improved dramatically. And that, I think, is a great sign. It's not going to get any easier for him either. The competition isn't getting easier, but I think these are valuable reps that really can set a baseline where I do think Nebraska should be a bowling team, maybe even get to 7 wins potentially. And then you get that extra rep so that next season you come in feeling really, really good about the quarterback position. And that's when I think you'll see the most dramatic jump would be from your freshman to your sophomore year for Dylan Raiola.
Danny, how dare you be measured with context, trying to help us be, I don't know, not demand results right away. No, all very good points for sure. Well, coming up on the other side, look, we are going to have time later in the week to give you our best bets, our locks for one of the biggest games of the entire season, Ohio State going to play Oregon. But where will this matchup be decided? We'll let you know in Big Game Breakdown next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. One of our favorite things to do here in the mid portion of the week is to not necessarily give you those winners, those against the spread locks. That's for Thursday. It's to go inside the matchup and really look at the places where the biggest games of the weekend are going to be decided. And dadgummit, it don't get bigger than Ohio State going to play Oregon. It's number 2 versus number 3 in the AP poll. It is 2 of the top teams in terms of the odds makers' thoughts on who's going to end up winning the Big Ten. A lot to be able to handle, a lot to be able to weigh. And so I guess I want to start with you, Danny, because when you're looking at Ohio State, going into Autzen Stadium, what are the things that you think Ohio State needs to be focused on if it wants to be sure that it emerges on the other side of this colossal battle still with a 0 in the loss column?
I know we've talked about this a lot, and I keep wondering what Ohio State is holding back, right? Have they been holding some things back, not wanting to show the Ducks because they knew this game was circled on their calendar for a while? I did notice that Will Howard's carries against Iowa took a little bit of a jump. And I do think that will be something that Chip Kelly will probably implement more just to keep Oregon's defense a little bit honest, open up a little bit more of those lanes for Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. It'll open up things in the pass game. And I think it opens up everything. I mean, go back and listen to Kirby Smart when he talked about how do you defend Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams on the outside. He's like, when you have a running quarterback, it's almost impossible because your safety has to get involved. Then you can't double over the top. And with a weapon like Jeremiah Smith, I think it'll be the same way. So that's kind of one of the tweaks that I think you might see is more Will Howard rushing the football. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I'll be curious because Oregon's offensive line, it's gotten healthier and it's gotten more consistent. After struggling the first couple games, the last 3 games, they've given up 0 sacks. And I think that's a lot for Dylan Gabriel getting more comfortable in the system. But how can they throw off Dylan Gabriel in this highly timing system where it's rhythm-based, you're getting the ball out of your hands? How can they disrupt that rhythm and make sure that he can't get into a flow where he's dinking and dunking it down the field and then boom, he takes a big shot? Because they've been a pretty big play offense too. So I'm very, very fascinated about this matchup and some of the chess match that's going to be taken on.
Danny, couldn't agree more, man. I'm really fascinated to see just what Chip Kelly has held back. And also, like what Will Stein, the offensive coordinator for Oregon, has held back. Like Oregon could have easily chose to beat UCLA by 50 if they wanted to. And they basically just coasted the second half of that game. Like they have struggled early in the season, in large part due to offensive line injuries. Some of those guys are back. Some of those guys, unfortunately, looks like will not be back, at least not anytime soon. But in recent weeks, like they have looked a good bit better and have just basically coasted the second half of games. And to me, that is holding things back in preparation of this big matchup. Let's go back to just 2 weeks ago when Kirby Smart was flabbergasted at halftime by how much empty formation stuff Kalen DeBoer broke out on him to build a 28-0 lead. Like, this is the reason. I think a lot of coaches watched what Michigan did last year, okay? And if you're Ohio State, like, do we really want to borrow from Michigan? Well, they won the national title, so maybe not a terrible idea. Michigan treated like the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season last year like a preseason and showed nothing. So I think what Ohio State did last week against Iowa was purposeful. They didn't have to do that. They could have scored and beat Iowa without running Will Howard. What are they going to have off that, right? Now Oregon's got a little bit of stuff to rep. Obviously, Dan Lanning has faced Chip Kelly before because Chip Kelly was the head coach of UCLA for a while and still the primary play caller there in Los Angeles. So he's seen this before, but I guarantee you Chip's got some stuff cooked up. Now, on the other side, Oregon is 78th in plays of 20-plus yards this year. Like, I know Dylan Gabriel doesn't have much of an arm, and that's why he's in college still and not the NFL. But how does Ohio State get that to continue? Or on the flip side, how does Oregon find a way to break that trend? Because can you drive on this Ohio State defense? I don't think so.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. Like, if you look at this, Oregon comes into the game ranked 70th nationally in offense in explosive rates overall, not just over 20 yards, but in running and throwing the game. And on the other side, Ohio State's defense is second nationally as far as explosive play rate allowed. So that is going to be something where if Oregon's going to figure that out this week, it's not going to be easy to do so. But going back towards the quarterback situation and the offenses and how they've held things back, I think one of the interesting aspects is Both of these teams have transfer quarterbacks. Ohio State also has a brand new offensive coordinator. And I think it takes time for a play caller to learn a quarterback. And this isn't a situation where these guys have been backups on the roster for the last few years. You've been able to work with them in practice. You're kind of learning on the fly. And I feel like, just anecdotally from what I have seen, Chip Kelly and Will Howard are more in sync, I think, than Will Stein and Dylan Gabriel are to this point with what they want to do as far as what they're good at, the strengths and their weaknesses. Because one fun fact here is, well, it's not very fun if you're Oregon. Bo Nix threw 3 interceptions all of last season. Dylan Gabriel has thrown 3 red zone interceptions in the last 2 games. That has been a problem for Oregon. And I think another situation where when you look at this matchup, Ohio State, we know about Jeremiah Smith. We know about Emeka Egbuka. They have fantastic receivers. And that's been a huge bonus for Will Howard trying to learn this offense, because you could just throw the ball to one of those guys and watch them go be amazing. I have not really been impressed at all by Oregon's receivers. Outside of Tez Johnson, they really haven't shown much on tape that I've watched. I think Evan Stewart, who was a transfer in, who was a big name, former highly rated recruit, really has not made much of a noticeable impact in this offense. And I think it has hurt Oregon overall, because as they've gotten into conference play, their offensive line has gotten healthier, which in turn has helped their run game really improve. But their passing game's gotten a lot worse, because now that they're facing actual talented defenses, their receivers are not having nearly the same kind of success in getting space and getting open. And given Dylan Gabriel, who, as you mentioned, Bud, doesn't exactly have the most zip on his ball, the kind of separation that he needs to fit some of these throws in without the defense getting there to break it up. And then when you get to the lines of scrimmage here, I mean, compared to my expectations for both units coming into the year, I've been more impressed with Ohio State's offensive line than I have been Oregon's defensive line, but I still think this is going to be the first real true test for both of these units, so it's hard to come to a conclusion there. But on the flip side, even though Oregon's offensive line is improving, the interior still looks pretty vulnerable, and Ohio State's got some very good guys on that defensive line, particularly on the inside. I would expect you're going to see Ohio State bringing a lot of pressure in the A-gaps in this game and getting into Dylan Gabriel's face quickly. And it's going to be a big question mark to see how Oregon can handle that.
All right. So look, I'm sensing a lot of questions right now. So Tom, so what is on the checklist for Oregon to win this football game? Because, we're nobody's giving any picks out, but we're all kind of like sensing that this matchup is the same way, where, you've got an Ohio State team where it feels like they've held everything back, and an Oregon team that so far, in terms of form, in terms of performance, maybe hasn't quite hit everything. And in a way where I'm not thinking that Oregon held much back. I mean, second half against Michigan State, second half against UCLA, but I do think you're spot on right there. So Tom, what needs to happen? What's on the to-do list for the Ducks if they're going to be able to win?
They're going to have to run the ball a lot and effectively. And I think that it's a weird situation. You think of Oregon and their offense and what they have been, and it's like, okay, this is an explosive unit who can put points up on the board. But that has not been the case with this Oregon team so far this year. I think they have downgraded at quarterback. I owe Bo Nix an apology for calling Dylan Gabriel a left-handed Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix has proven he was a better player in this offense so far. But I just think that with Jordan James, you're going to want to lean on your run game. You've been doing it very effectively the last few weeks, and you want to keep that Ohio State offense off the field as much as possible, because I don't care who you have on defense. You're probably not going to win a whole lot of matchups against what the Buckeyes are throwing out there across the field with the skill position players they have and the strength they have on their offensive line. So I think you got to control the tempo, control the game, take care of the football, because they were able to survive 3 red zone turnovers against Michigan State and UCLA, including one that was a pick 6. You do that against Ohio State, you're cooked. You've got no chance, because they will take advantage of it. And I also think another key factor here is we have seen Ohio State kind of like a boxer feel out its opponent in the first half of games and then come out in the second half and completely light them up. In fact, they're outscoring opponents 84-3 in the third quarter. There's a fun stat for you guys to keep in mind. But I just think that if I'm Oregon, I have to be prepared for that punch, because they have been one of the best teams at adjusting in the second half. So I have to have a counter ready. So I think it's a very difficult path for the Ducks to manage, but I do think they have enough talent and they have a good enough coaching staff where I have to give them a decent shot to do so.
Both these teams are super talented. Tom had most of the stuff on my checklist. The one thing I would say is, if I'm Oregon, I am charting what Chip did at UCLA, and I'm looking to see what he hasn't broken out yet this year. We talked some QB run game. They put that on film last week. The two things that he has not shown a lot of this year that he did show at UCLA. One, unbalanced. I almost guarantee you Ohio State's going to give Oregon a dose of unbalance come Saturday, because we saw how Kalen DeBoer did it in the rematch last year when Washington played Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
I think we get a lot of trips into the boundary stuff. That whole Saban tree of defense, they do have trouble with trips into the boundary. So when you have three receivers to the short side of the field, because of the width, the college hash marks, and some of the adjustments and calls you make with some of their coverage stuff, that can kind of screw with them. That's how you kind of steal an explosive play. We actually saw DeBoer do this to Kirby Smart's defense just 2 Saturday nights ago. So I think you'll see that. The other thing is they've run some of like the RPO stuff with like the bubble game, but they haven't really done a whole lot of the vertical RPO stuff. So how does Oregon handle that? And on the flip side, Jim Knowles, the DC, has a tendency to bring a lot of pressure and to play very aggressively, but Oregon's receivers are small, right? And their tight ends have not been the threat that they thought they were going to be. Teams have had success against Oregon this year, just saying, hey, we're going to keep two guys high. If you want to run the ball, cool. Like, we'll let you do it a little bit in compressed space. We think our bigger people are better, and that Dylan Gabriel has trouble fitting the ball in really tight windows, and your receivers aren't very big. So you're a little bit smaller of a team. We don't want to let you get over the top with us at that speed. We're going to try to sit back and win in the red zone, spin that red zone roulette wheel, and force some field goals. So, like, can Knowles not just blitz all the time? Like, he's done a nice job of that this year. In a really big game, that's usually his tendency, is to go hyper aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Can he stick with a conservative game plan and let his front four win?
When do we become an Ohio State Buckeye podcast? Is this a Big Ten show, or is this a Buckeye? I feel like the way this is being talked about, we're completely forgetting that the Oregon Ducks are ranked third. They are undefeated. And I will remind people, who is the best quarterback? Who's the best offense that this Ohio State defense has faced yet? I mean, they haven't. They haven't shut anybody down. And I know that Ashton Genty ran wild on Oregon's defense, but he's been running wild on everybody's defense. So that game, which was all of a sudden was like, the most points they've given up outside that game is 14. Now, I don't expect them to hold the Buckeyes offense to just 14 points, but I do feel like Oregon has slowly been getting better as they've gotten more continuity, as they've gotten healthier, and Dylan Gabriel's gotten more comfortable at the system. The throws that he made in the red zone last week, I think they were not good throws, but I also don't think he'll make them in this game. I wonder if those were some of those feeling out the process. What can I work here? Still getting used to his wide receivers. He cannot turn the ball over. And I do wonder if that recipe, if they don't hit on the big plays, can they, with a very experienced, very accurate underneath thrower, can they work the tight ends, work the flats, work the shallow crosses, the underneath game, and try to do that, drive the length of the field, and keep the time of possession going, combining that with the run game and keep it away from that high-powered Ohio State offense?
Well, if you want picks for this big-time matchup, of course, the Locks episode of the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Cover 3 podcast, will be coming up on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And coming up on the other side, we'll get you set for big time on CBS as Penn State travels to the Coliseum to play USC, taking you inside that matchup and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. That's where you're going to be able to find big time on CBS, as it's going to be Penn State heading to the Coliseum to go take on USC. The Trojans licking their wounds a little bit coming out of a disappointing loss at Minnesota. Penn State continues to rise in the rankings, continues to remain right in the thick of the Big Ten conference race. So let's focus on the team that needs some work, Tom. What does USC need to do to very quickly address a myriad of issues and prepare for welcoming one of the best teams, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country?
It needs to figure out a way to get a lot better on the lines of scrimmage in a hurry, because I know that they faced Michigan a few weeks ago. I'm telling you right now, the Penn State team that they'll be facing on Saturday, when you put it together, both their offensive and defensive lines, is better along the lines of scrimmage than Michigan is. And if you watched that USC loss against Minnesota last week, one of the more alarming things to me was, like, the run defense did a pretty solid job against Michigan. It gave up the explosives, but overall it was stout. last weekend against Minnesota, they were getting pushed around a little bit. And I look at this Penn State offensive line, who I think has been phenomenal so far this season in both the run and passing game. I look to them. They're going to be a very difficult challenge for this USC front, which has lost bodies in recent weeks with guys like Barrick Alexander deciding to opt out and redshirt the rest of the season. Whether you think he's a superstar or not, he is still depth, and it's beginning to show that they're missing that depth for USC has not been a good thing. So that is going to be a key area of concern if I'm USC. And then on the other side, as far as protecting Miller Moss, listen, man, this Penn State defense is phenomenal. Like, they have dudes on the defensive line. They've got Abdul Carter. They are able to get pressure on you without blitzing, whether that is with Carter or Zane Durant, Filbert Smith, Danny Dennis Sutton, all these guys. And then when they do blitz, they do an incredible job of disguising it and bringing defensive backs in who have also been very effective blitzers when asked to do so. Like, this is not a fun test for any offense or quarterback to figure out. And if you look at what Miller Moss has done this season, I mean, it's not a shock, but he has been far less effective when he's under pressure. His completion percentage drops considerably, and his interception rate has more than doubled. So USC really needs to figure out a way to keep a clean pocket for Miller Moss to find his big-bodied receivers down the field, and hopefully they can make some plays for him. But if they can't, even at home, it could be a pretty long day for the Trojans.
We've seen exactly how much they miss Caleb Williams now that their offensive line is back to not playing, awesome like it did against LSU. And I think, like, that's the real key takeaway. Minnesota's D-line is nothing special, y'all. And they gave USC fits. Like, if that's a major red flag if you're a USC fan right now. Like, Minnesota has been pushed around by a whole lot of teams this year, defensive line-wise. And USC was like, oh, man, these guys are pretty good. I'm like, no, they're not. You know who is? Penn State. Denied Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter off the edge. They've got to solve for that and solve for that now. I think there's some hope, right? Penn State's DBs are not quite as good as they were last year. We saw USC effectively use some of the screen game, some like the screen and shot game against LSU in that opener. They tried some against Michigan. Didn't work quite as well, but they can always maybe go back to that. They needed an unreal performance from their defense, at least relative to expectation. And as Tom mentioned, all those defensive linemen who've been missing, I think they miss Eric Gentry a ton too at linebacker. Like, Gentry played his butt off in some of those early games and papered over some of the mistakes. USC's, I didn't think their defense was going to be as good as it played in the first couple of weeks of this season, but I'm pretty sure I'm back to where I thought it was going to be now that they have some of these guys out. So they're going to have to pull one out here.
Yeah, and I thought because after you lose to Michigan, heartbreaking fashion, give them a pass for the first half against Wisconsin when they're trailing. That's sort of the hangover game. But that hangover lasted, even despite that comeback from behind win against Wisconsin. You thought maybe they should bounce back. Like, that should have been the wake-up call. They couldn't get anything going. Lack of big playmaking ability, too. And a lot of that comes with Miller Moss running for his life most of the day. But they only had 2 plays over 20-plus yards, and they were both rushes, one from Woody Marks and one from Quentin Joyner. Longest pass play of the day was only an 18-yard completion to Mekhi Lemon. So an offense which traditionally has been a big playmaking type of offense where you get those guys and you scheme them wide open, they were either not there or didn't have time to get them there. So I thought that was something that was exposed somewhat that they're going to need to get against Penn State. I totally agree with you guys. If they don't protect Miller Moss, he is not the type of quarterback that's dynamic enough that can get outside and extend plays and make pockets. He's adequate, but he clearly is not the playmaker that Caleb Williams was. So I think if you're USC, you're looking at this on the opposite side and saying, man, this defense, which has been probably a pleasant surprise, how are they going to hold up against Penn State's offense, which I think all of a sudden, if you're a USC fan, you're kind of hoping that you can contain them, because I don't know if you're expecting to put up many points.
All right. So for the Penn State side of this, Danny, how would you, obviously at running back, we've had some injury issues. The offense as a whole seems to still really rely on that ground game. We have seen more explosives, but what about Drew Aller? Like, what about Penn State's offense, Drew Aller going into this environment in the Coliseum? How have you seen that Penn State offense evolve since Andy Kotelnicki came and took over?
Is it crazy to say, like, it's different, but it's a lot more the same too? I mean, remember last year, Drew Aller was, statistically really strong. The touchdown to interception ratio was great, very similar to where it is this year. I think he's been more consistent, as evidenced by his completion percentage, maybe a little bit accurate, but I still wonder where this big playmaking capability is at. Like, is that going to evolve to a place where all of a sudden they're this explosive offense? Because I still don't look at them in the same light that you look at Ohio State or some of the other more prolific offenses in the country, which I think is specifically the reason they brought in Colton Nickey. So I'll also, I wonder too if they have something in there. Nick Singleton being back, I think will be a huge boost to this run game, but I still would like to see Drew Aller take that next step for working the ball vertically down the field. Still really haven't had that explosive firepower that I thought we were going to get. And some of that might be in the lack of an emerging wide receiver. We've talked about that. Like, where's the Julian Fleming transfer portal move going to pay off? That hasn't exactly paid its dividends, but I still look at the receivers as a group that doesn't exactly strike a lot of fear in many opposing secondaries.
Agree with you on that, Danny. I think Fleming's probably a bust for them, at least relative for the purpose taken. Like, he can't be a receiver one in the Big Ten. Harrison Wallace is going to have to step up. I'm going to go back to the Illinois game. Penn State had an incredibly good success rate and just got shoestrung tackled on 6 or 7 runs. Like, Illinois did a great job making sure a run was like 12 yards and not 70 yards. Can they hit a couple of those explosive runs? Like last week, that whole team looked like they had the flu or something. Like, they were just kind of playing a little bit slower. I think they knew UCLA was not truly a threat to win that ball game. So if they can continue to like have a good success rate like they did against Illinois, the stats say eventually 1 or 2 of those will bust out in explosives. Colton Nickey will probably be able to scheme one open, and they should be okay. But this definitely could be a dogfight.
Again, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, so that you can check out Penn State at USC. You can watch it on America's Most Watched Network, the network of stars, CBS. You can stream it on Paramount Plus. Well, coming up on the other side, I know it seems crazy in early October, but the Big Ten title race is underway. We might have some potential elimination games for the Big Ten title race. We'll let you know what's at stake next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. We have already begun the countdown because, yes, you will be able to watch the Big Ten championship game live on CBS. Now, who's going to be playing in it? Well, that race is underway, and we've got a couple games that we've identified as potential elimination games in that Big Ten title race. The first one, we got Washington. After that big win, they've got to go play at Iowa. Both of these teams are 1-1 in conference play already. A second loss this early in the season, well, that might have you out of this thing. Tom, as you're looking at Iowa and Washington, who do you have more confidence in remaining in that Big Ten title race?
That's a loaded question. I don't know if I'm confident in either one, to be honest with you, but of these two teams, I think that we've at least seen Washington beat somebody that you kind of have high thought, hold in higher esteem. We saw Washington take down Michigan last week at home. So it gives you an idea of what their ceiling is. And then also when I compare them to Iowa, the Hawkeyes are the better team defensively. But I feel like Washington has a serious advantage at the quarterback spot with Will Rogers, who entering the weekend is currently second in the league in touchdown passes. And while he is not a spectacular quarterback, and he's kind of similar to Dylan Gabriel in that he's been around a long time for a good reason, and you know exactly who he is, he's been very effective in the role that Washington has asked him to take on. So going on the road against this defense, I think it's going to be a very big test for him because this is still an Iowa defense that does an excellent job of throwing different looks at you and confusing you and baiting you into mistakes. Can he avoid the mistakes in this game as he has coming into the season or all season long? But on the other side, Caleb Johnson got bottled up by Ohio State. How many teams can really bottle up Caleb Johnson? Is Washington one of them? They did an excellent job against Michigan last week. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to continue that trend against the Hawkeyes. But it's always tough going into Kinnick and getting a win. But right now, I guess I have more confidence in Washington.
It's an interesting question because I think in this game, I might actually have a little more confidence in Washington. But in terms of making the Big Ten title game, I have vastly more confidence in Iowa. And that is because of the disparity in schedule. When you have a conference this big, you're going to have some teams that have a really easy schedule, and you're going to have some teams that have a harder. Washington, much harder. Iowa will be favored in all remaining games if things play out as they are right now. Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, who has the backup quarterback, UCLA, Maryland, and then hosting Nebraska to end the year. So if Iowa can find a way to get through this, and I think they can, this is Washington's second trip, 2 time zones away, right, in the last 14 days. Recall they had to go to Rutgers just 2 weeks ago, and they moved the ball some, and they had some critical turnovers and mistakes and mental errors and penalties. So I do think Iowa can get this done. And if they do, Iowa absolutely can be a spoiler in the Big Ten title game. Like, a lot of people probably aren't projecting this, but look at that schedule and tell me which game you're real confident they're going to lose the rest of the way.
Very well, then they've also got to finish the job. All right, Danny, same question to you. We got Wisconsin against Rutgers, both 1-1 in conference play. Who do you have more confidence in remaining in the Big Ten title race?
I have the most confidence that the score is going to be 19-16. That this will be just an absolute bloodbath. I'll go with Rutgers playing at home. I know Wisconsin had the massive breakout game. Braden Locke had 3 touchdown passes. They ran, running back by committee since Ches Malusi stepped away from the program. But I do trust Rutgers, more of an identity, running the football. They've had Kyle Monungai really emerge once again. Ethan Kalik-Manis has been pretty good in that role of game manager. I do think it'll be a close game, but I'll lean toward Rutgers slightly. We talked to Shiano. He feels confident in that defense. I'll trust them slightly more, but I love it as a low-scoring game.
Yeah, same on both accounts. Especially, I think Wisconsin's 50 burger might have been due to the opponent as well. Well, coming up on the other side, we always like to leave you with a player to watch going into the weekend of the Big Ten. We'll do that next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Always love to send you out with a player to watch in the Big Ten in the week ahead. Tom, who's your player to watch?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight Illinois wide receiver Pat Bryant, who got off to a very good start to the season along with his entire team. But last we saw the Illini, he was not having the best night against Penn State. He was held to 3 catches for 39 yards. But the good news, Pat, you're facing Purdue this week, and Purdue is giving up yards in big chunks to just about everybody that comes along, and I think Pat Bryant is going to be the next guy. I'm expecting probably about 6-7 catches, 120 to 130 yards, and a couple touchdowns. Everybody that Purdue has faced has torn them apart, and I don't think the Illini will be any different.
Tom, I'm going to go with Oregon defensive tackle Derek Harmon. I think this is a really important guy for them. If they're going to have a chance to win, they have to find a way to turn over Ohio State. And that probably means forcing Will Howard to throw the ball a bunch of times. Harmon has to play big inside to help stop that Ohio State run game and give Oregon a chance to force turnovers from Will Howard.
I'm going to go USC quarterback Miller Moss. We talked about him early in the show, how he was running for his life. He's coming off his worst game as a Trojan with 2 interceptions, only 200 yards passing. He's going to have to play that role of hero at some point. I just don't trust their protection to hold up. So can he get outside? Can he make enough plays to keep this game competitive with Penn State's defensive front 7 coming after him? I love watching how quarterbacks bounce back and really find out what type of quarterback you are. So all eyes for me will be on Miller Moss.
Ooh, Danny, and I will be where Miller Moss's eyes will be because I'm looking at Penn State defensive end Abdul Carter. I'm talking about a pass rusher that has the closing speed of a predatory cat. I'm talking about somebody that destroys third downs and any dreams that USC has of being able to go out there and compete for a Big Ten title. I've been so impressed with the way that this Penn State defense just continues to build throughout a game and just frustrate the opposing offense and the opposing quarterback. Fantastic job from the coaching to the players. But number 11, right there coming off the edge, that is what Miller Moss needs to be the most afraid of. Well, if you liked what you got right here, we're available all the time. YouTube.com/cover3 is where we are live Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 11 a.m., Saturday nights at 11:30 p.m. And of course, boom, scan that QR code and you can download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts.